Okay, a slew of tariff deals coming down the pipeline. Many countries, who wins, who loses, who feels more special for the United States, not so much for the United States, all this and more. Also, how United States plans to tackle China, which might try to sneak in their products through other countries. All this stuff and more in this video. Small request to all of you to please like this video, and if you have not already subscribed to our channel, please do subscribe to our channel. The lighting might not be the most perfect, but I think the messaging is, as always, what you would like to hear. Here we go. Trump's tariff deals. Who is special and who is not? India is still in the pipeline. It hasn't happened yet, but it is expected that it will happen anytime now. So that's where things stand as far as India is concerned. So let's jump in. What is the doctrine of Trump on trade? Trump's recent trade deals with Japan, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, and a few other countries, and each one has a slightly different twist to this whole thing, which is why I'm going to go country by country. I'm also going to talk about where things stand with India. It turns out it's not just two things that we talked about. There are 4 or 5 things, all of which are in contention. All these things need to be sorted out before we can have a trade deal of some sort with India, but it looks like it's not very far away. So we're going to look at that also. So what is the core principle? No more free rides. Access to the US market comes with reciprocal terms, with enforcement mechanisms, strategic alignments, and also, if necessary, economic and military. We are going to be, United States will not hesitate to use these things in any way possible, any way, shape or form to assert itself. You can say, oh, wait a minute, US is being what it is, as always, the big bully. But you know something, many countries have abused the privileges they got from the United States, and that's why all this is happening now. And I'm going to talk about this in more detail when we have all the data as to how WTO was completely abused by China, and wink wink nod nod, the United States successive governments did not do anything about it until this time when Trump said in his second term, this is the first thing I'm going to take head on. Until we have this thing solved, nothing else is going to be important. You're going to have a little bit of short-term pain, but in the long run, I think this is good for everybody. So let's first take a look at what happened between United Kingdom and United States. The US import duty on UK cars reduced from 27% or 27.5% to be exact to 10% for the first 100,000 vehicles annually. What are the cars that I can think of from UK? The Range Rover. That's a very popular SUV that comes to United States, and there could be other car companies that might be selling their products here. Then, US beef import quota to the United Kingdom increased to 13,000 tons duty free. So this is UK importing from US. UK is going to allow 1.4 billion liters of US ethanol imports duty free. Duty free. UK gets a temporary exemption from US global metal tariffs, like for example 25% on steel and aluminum, but final resolution is still pending through quotas or further negotiations. So this is still not done deal. We are still somewhere in the negotiation stage. So it's not all great, but the thing that we all should look for is how will United States monitor a product that might be manufactured elsewhere and could be snuck in through this country. I mean, it could be Mexico, it could be Vietnam, it could be Indonesia. I can go on and on. So all that stuff we are going to address each one, how the United States has planned mousetraps to catch all these things. Now let's take a look at Japan trade deal. 15% reciprocal tariffs, lower than the 25% threatened, but higher than 0. Looks like 10% or 15% will be the new normal. I'm just telling across all the different countries. Now, Japan to invest on top of this $550 billion in the United States. I think Trump is also trying hard to make India to invest in the United States. I don't know where those deals are. That could be also part of the deal with India. I'll come to that in just a moment. 90% of the profits from the deal go to the US. So this is how I understand it. The $550 billion that Japan is going to invest in United States. It could be even Japanese companies operating out of United States, but creating jobs in the United States. The guarantee that Japan is agreeing to is that it will only take out 10% of the profits it makes out of the $550 billion it is investing in United States. Take a look at all the reference links. Tell me if I'm wrong in my understanding of this, but it looks like that's what it is. Maybe that is one of the things why the Japanese members of parliament are not so happy about it. That story will play itself out in a few days. Just wait. US exports like cars, rice, agriculture gain expanded access to Japanese markets. Major tariff reprieve for Japan's auto sector, but with quotas. That means only so many thousand cars of Japanese make will be allowed at lower tariffs. Once a quantity exceeds, the tariff might go up. Now, it also creates a baseline for future deals with allies that will be equal or less generous. See, this is where, the thing about if you are the first to sign up, maybe you'll get better terms. As the longer you delay, maybe the terms will get harder and harder because you no longer have that first mover advantage. I'm specifically talking about India. Let's wait and see. I'll come to that section in just a moment. Let's take a look at Indonesia's trade deal. Indonesia was long considered as China's backdoor, and I tell you what exactly that is. That is, the new term that US is using is transshipment. Transshipment is something where the product is manufactured in China, it comes to Indonesia, for example, and then put stamped as if it's made in Indonesia, and then Indonesia is acting like a pass-through mechanism, and everything comes to United States. Now, US is trying to put a stop on that. And how is it trying to do that? First of all, Indonesia will eliminate tariffs on almost 99% of United States goods. US imposes 19%, 19, on Indonesian exports. It is down from what was 32% before. US gains major access in energy, agriculture, and aviation, for example, Boeing sales. Indonesia must adopt US labor, intellectual property, and vehicle safety standards. This is a very important distinction here, especially intellectual property. A lot of the Southeastern nations, very difficult to enforce US intellectual property. I, as an inventor, know this thing firsthand. So I can I can have a series of lectures about each country and its implementation or views on intellectual property. I'm glad that the United States is making other countries respect its IP. Again, their IP is respected in the United States because US has always had a strong culture of respecting other countries' intellectual property. Anyway, so that's a good thing. Now, local content mandates are dropped. Forced labor products banned. So a few things that they might identify as being used, being built using child labor, for example, or forced labor, those things will be identified and those may not be allowed to enter the United States. And most important, transshipped Chinese goods will be penalized with 40% tariff. So 19% is normal. If something is identified to have been originated from China and just being a pass-through through Indonesia, that's going to attract 40%. So that's a big step up. Let's take a look at Philippines. In Philippines, the theme is both commerce as well as defense, how United States can fortify Philippines' defenses. Philippines will be entering an open market with the US, meaning zero tariffs on US goods. US will impose a 19% tariff rate on imports from the Philippines. This is a reduction from a previously threatened 20%. Now, it eliminates import licensing and trade restrictions. See, what this means is that you can't have bars put because, certain thing has not been licensed, and to basically catch things in red tape. That red tape is also being cut. It also strengthens IP protections and digital trade rules in Philippines. IP protections are very important, and I can't stress enough, because United States is where much of the IP used to be generated. Lately, it has moved to some other countries, including India and China and so on. But everybody needs other countries to protect or respect the IPs generated in the respective countries. And I see this as a forward step where every country has that feeling that, okay, the IP created and recognized in my country will also be recognized worldwide because the United States is doing that. So that's a good thing in my opinion. Okay, it also includes an anti-China military clause blending trade with security. I don't have the details of that, but I'll share it in the next few episodes. It also expands US manufacturing and tech influence in Southeast Asia. I have to tell you one thing. Beyond all the mousetraps, will China find another way to still, sell goods cheaply into United States? Possible. You have to still be aware and awaken to that fact that these things will happen, and how well or how quickly you respond is going to make the effectiveness complete. Okay, so let's take a look at Vietnam. Vietnam is considered to be a cat's paw of China because both are communist countries. They are very, very strongly linked. And how is United States going to catch China sneaking in its products through Vietnam? I'm being blunt here. That's exactly what China tries to do. So a deal imposes 20% tariffs on most Vietnamese exports to the US. So if you look at Philippines, it's 19%, and this one is 20%. A 40% tariff will apply to goods transshipped through Vietnam from other countries, particularly China. So they are leaving it open. It's not just China. If US can prove that a certain product was not manufactured in Vietnam, but Vietnam is being used as a pass-through, then those products will attract 40% duties. US does impose these things effectively, and people should not be feeling that, oh, we'll still sneak in one way or the other. That's not going to happen. The important thing about Vietnam is the deal is still not finalized. Negotiations are still ongoing, and US is concerned that goods from tariff-hit countries like China are being rerouted through Vietnam and falsely labeled made in Vietnam to bypass tariffs. This is something that Vietnam will have to convince US that no, these are actually products manufactured in US. I mean, that could mean like surprise visits by somebody from US to go to Vietnamese factories to absolutely make sure that a certain product which is being labeled as being made in Vietnam is indeed being made in Vietnam. This is sort of like policing. I don't know to what extent US will be able to do that effectively. I mean, they can catch them once or twice, but then afterwards, if they say, come back and say, oh yeah, we have rectified everything, this becomes a little bit of a not so effective policing. So we'll have to wait and see how this goes on. If Vietnam follows the standards and does an effective policing over a period of time, then they gain the trust of the United States, and that's where I would like to see this thing go. Now, what is the new global standard for tariffs? 10% is the new zero, meaning like no matter what, you're going to attract at least 10% tariffs. The UK trade deal at 10% is now seen as the best possible benchmark. Japan's 15% tariff signals a rising global baseline for access to US market. Where will India fall? 10% or 15%? Other countries, Vietnam, South Korea, India, EU are under pressure to accept similar or worse terms. So this is the thing I told you about. If the longer you wait, the worse it becomes. The strategic doctrine is no access without reciprocity or reforms. Now, India and EU, these are the next two in line. Let's take a look at what is happening with India. India faces pressure post-Japan deal, and it cannot go below 15% without giving more. So where is the sticking point, or where are the sticking points? 5 negotiation rounds have taken place so far. Both nations aimed for an interim agreement before the Trump-era tariff deadline of August 1st, but disagreements over agriculture, dairy, industrial duties and automobiles mean a deal is unlikely before then. Now, we know that India is resisting reducing tariffs on agriculture and milk, because I think in both these cases, India is now producing more than what it itself needs. So maybe that could be another reason why India is resisting, other than the fact of what I told you about GMO and animal meat being used in some of the dairy stuff. See, animal meat could be used not just as part of the milk, but what feed goes into the cows that are producing the milk, cows and buffaloes. For example, I buy milk where the thing says it is grass-fed cow. The cow has been fed only grass and the milk that comes out of it. But then that means we have to pay a premium for it. How many of us are willing to pay that premium? So these are all the things that are, pros and cons. Let's wait and see where the final duty is going to rest. Okay, EU. What is happening with the EU and America? EU deal is expected to follow Japan template or face retaliation. That is, 15 to 19%, somewhere in that ballpark. With August 1 deadline looming, negotiations aim to finalize a trade deal by this date to avert steep US import duties of up to 30% on EU goods. Remember, I told you EU as a bloc enjoys $228 billion surplus with America. So this somehow US is trying to offset this. One is, of course, I told you, increase LNG production, export of LNG from United States to Europe. Will that cut it? I don't think so. There are going to be other things that are going to be also demanded. Let's wait and see where this goes. The important thing here is the US seeks stronger protection and leverage while the EU demands reciprocity and unity. The message is clear: either comply or lose market share to compliant countries. Broader doctrine: commerce, not chaos. Trump turns trade into leverage for both economic and military alliances. If you want access to a market, you open yours or face tariffs. By the way, people might say, what is this sudden mantra called tariffs? In the initial days of United States formation, like 1780s to 1830 or so, US used to routinely levy tariffs on all the Western countries, like the European countries, because they were remembering what happened in the Boston Tea Party. So remember that this is not something new. They're just going back to those days when US used to levy tariff. There were organizations like WTO which kind of normalized these things. But if countries repeatedly ignore the WTO rules, what do? This is really aimed at China, and the unfortunate thing is China has got its tentacles spread across the world, so it has to be dealt in a more harsher way, which is how the tariffs appear to be today. Again, many of you will disagree with me, I'm sure, by way of comments. Please feel free. This is an open debate. We are going to get varying points of view also, whether US is doing this the right way or not. But be that as it may, the important takeaway here is that it's here. Trade treaties are being signed. The sooner any country does it, the better I think it will be for that country and the United States. Let's wait and see how this thing goes. All sorts of stuff is going on right now. South Korea is expected to match Japanese terms. China's deal deadline is 12th of August. Sweden is hosting the next negotiations round with China. Latin America and Africa will face a 10% tariff floor unless they liberalize, and global trade norms are being reset around the US terms. Will the globe push back? It is trying to push back. All that has happened thus far is what that is, but I think a consensus is emerging, a realization that this needs to be done. The world's biggest market continues to be United States. Maybe India will be that 10, 20, 30 years from now. But until then, it is the US that calls the shots. That's where things are. NAFTA, WTO, you can go on and on as to how many things were done in the past to try and do this thing. Each one has had some limited success, after which countries start flouting the norms. That's where things are now. I'm not saying that the tariff deals are going to be, cast in concrete and that people or countries will not get around it. But at least if good monitoring and good policing can make it a fair place for everybody to play, and it's a lesson for all countries to try and make sure that you too consume what you produce. That is the best thing for the world. Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to click on the bell button for notifications. Namaskar.